Imagine hurtling towards a tiny postage stamp in the middle of a vast ocean, going hundreds of miles an hour. Now, imagine you have to land on it perfectly. That was the terrifying reality for naval aviators in the early jet age. Landing a high-speed jet on a straight-deck aircraft carrier was one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. The deck was a chaotic ballet of planes landing, taking off, and being parked, all on a single, straight runway. In the late 1940s, this wasn't just dangerous, it was a crisis. Jets were getting faster and heavier. Landing speeds were climbing, but the carriers weren't getting any bigger. A pilot had to catch one of a few arresting wires with a tailhook. If they missed, they'd either have to slam on the brakes and hope not to crash into the planes parked at the front of the deck, or they'd hit a flimsy barrier meant to stop them. More often than not, this barrier would fail, leading to catastrophic accidents. Pilots called it a controlled crash. The U.S. Navy was losing a staggering number of planes, and, tragically, pilots. In 1 year alone, there were over 1,000 major landing accidents. The future of naval aviation was at stake. The straight deck was becoming obsolete. The problem was simple. There was no room for error. The landing area, takeoff area, and parking area were all crammed into one linear space. If a pilot came in too fast or missed the wires, they were headed straight for a wall of parked aircraft and personnel. Planners tried everything: stronger barriers, better arresting gear, even bizarre ideas like rubber decks that planes would belly flop onto. Nothing worked. The accident rate kept climbing. The U.S. Navy was so desperate they were seriously considering abandoning conventional carriers altogether. Then, one day in 1951, a British Royal Navy captain named Dennis Campbell had a moment of inspiration. He was a veteran pilot and the Deputy Chief Naval Representative for the Ministry of Supply. He and his team were brainstorming, sketching ideas on a notepad. Looking at the deck layout, a simple, almost ridiculously obvious thought struck him. Why does the landing strip have to be straight? What if we just angled it? He took a ruler and a pen and drew a line angled about 10 degrees to the port side, running from the stern all the way to the side of the ship. Suddenly, the entire geometry of the flight deck changed. With this simple, angled runway, a pilot who missed the arresting wires, what they call a bolter, would no longer be heading for a deadly crash. Instead, they could simply power up, take off again, and circle around for another attempt. It was a clear, unimpeded path back into the sky. This one simple change did more than just create a safe fly-off area. It completely reorganized the entire flight deck. The landing area was now separate from the takeoff and parking areas. This meant ships could launch and recover aircraft at the same time, dramatically increasing the operational tempo. The dangerous barrier could be removed entirely. The deck was safer, more efficient, and could handle faster, more powerful jets. Captain Campbell's idea was revolutionary. It was so simple, so elegant, that many wondered why no one had thought of it before. The initial reaction, however, was skepticism. It seemed too easy a fix for such a deadly problem. But the logic was undeniable. Model tests were conducted, and they proved Campbell's theory correct. The U.S. Navy, facing its own carrier crisis, was watching closely. They saw the potential immediately. In 1952, the HMS Triumph was modified with a painted angled deck for trials. The results were spectacular. Pilots loved it. The concept was a resounding success. The Americans were convinced. They quickly modified the USS Antietam, painting an angled runway on its deck. The first trials were conducted in early 1953, and the results were just as transformative. Landing accidents plummeted. One of the key figures who championed this in the U.S. was Admiral Apollo Sosek. He saw the genius in Campbell's idea and pushed hard for its adoption. The impact was immediate and profound. The angled deck, combined with another British invention, the steam catapult, saved carrier-based naval aviation. It allowed carriers to grow and accommodate the powerful supersonic jets that would define the Cold War and beyond. From the supercarriers of the United States Navy to the carriers of Britain, France, India, and China, every modern catabar carrier that's catapult-assisted takeoff but arrested recovery uses an angled flight deck. It's a standard feature, a fundamental part of a carrier's design. It's impossible to imagine modern naval power without it. And it all started with one man, a desk, and a simple but brilliant idea. Captain Dennis Campbell's sketch didn't just solve a technical problem. It saved countless lives. It transformed aircraft carriers from dangerous floating airfields into the dominant instruments of sea power they are today. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most complex problems have the simplest solutions, and that a single good idea can change the world. The next time you see footage of a jet landing flawlessly on a carrier, remember the chaotic era of the straight deck and the quiet captain whose angled line made it all possible. January 12, 1953, off Cuba's coast, Lieutenant Commander Harold Buell approaches USS Antietam in his F-9 F-5 Panther. He has landed on carriers more than 40 times, but never on an angled deck. This time feels different. This time, the barricade is gone. He lines up, calls the ball, and begins his approach. A sudden gust lifts him too high. On a straight deck, the landing signal officer would wave him off immediately. Instead, the officer waits. Buell adjusts, floats long, and misses all 4 wires. His tailhook. On a straight deck, this is where he would collide with the barricade at full power. But on Antietam, there is nothing ahead of him except deck space and ocean. He applies full throttle, waits the agonizing seconds for his engine to spool up, and climbs away safely. His second approach catches the 3rd wire. When he climbs out of his aircraft, he realizes a fear he had carried his entire career had faded in an instant. Over 60 days, Antietam records 1,327 landings. There are 8 missed wire approaches. That would have meant 5 or more catastrophic crashes on a straight deck. On the angled deck, every one of those pilots escaped unharmed. Within 2 years, the accident rate across U.S. carrier aviation drops dramatically. Landing mishaps fall by more than 70%. Barrier-related fatalities drop by 80%. But numbers alone do not reveal the human impact. In March 1953, Lieutenant James Davidson returned to Antietam with a damaged jet. His hydraulics failed. He had no flaps. His approach speed was dangerously high. On a straight deck, he would have ditched rather than attempt a landing that would certainly kill him and deck crew. On an angled deck, he tried 4 times. On the 4th attempt, he caught the final wire at 142 knots, the fastest successful carrier arrestment ever recorded at that time. He later wrote a letter to Campbell. "Sir, I am alive to write this because you refused to listen when people said your idea was impossible." By 1955, the British implemented angled decks on Ark Royal. Soon after, the French, Australians, and eventually even the Soviets followed. Every major carrier fleet in the world adopted the concept. By the 1970s, angled decks were so universal that young pilots did not realize carriers had ever been built differently. The innovation had become invisible, which is the final stage of all great revolutions. Campbell never sought fame. He avoided interviews, refused credit, and attended funerals of fallen aviators long after his retirement. He was promoted, awarded, and honored, but he did not display his medals. He cared only about the safety of pilots. He died in 2000 at age 92. His obituary mentioned the angled deck, but no short article could ever express what it meant. Every modern carrier landing for the last 70 years exists because one man refused to stay silent. Today, every United States, British, French, Indian, Chinese, and Russian carrier uses an angled deck exactly like the one Campbell sketched in 1951. The numbers are staggering. 15,000 carrier landings each year, hundreds of missed wire approaches that would have been fatal on a straight deck. Over the decades, tens of thousands of lives saved. One Marine Corps aviator later tracked down Campbell's family and wrote, "Your father gave me 142 second chances. He gave me a life." Campbell would never have said those words about himself, but history says them for him. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs do not come from those with the highest credentials. Sometimes they come from the person who refuses to accept the phrase, "That is how it has always been done." Sometimes history belongs to the one who simply asks, "Why not?" Before you continue with your day, consider this question. If you were in Campbell's position, surrounded by experts who rejected your idea, would you have pushed forward anyway? If this story moved you or sparked your curiosity, make sure you subscribe and like this video. There are many more stories like this one, stories that remind us how much difference one determined person can make.